30 seconds early. You're on.
Is it on? Okay. We're on 30 seconds early because Sunday we were about 5 minutes late. So we're just making up for it. Hopefully it works out that way. Missing some of our family tonight, and but I've got my lovely family here that I get to share Bible study with. I want to begin by talking about the needs of our church family that we're mindful of. One of them is Michelle Dunn's mother-in-law, Mary Dunn, had open heart surgery. Her lungs filled up, and then now she's having a pacemaker installed. So Michelle asked for us to pray for her. They live up in Cleveland, Ohio, and so we pray for Mary Dunn and Michelle's care for her. We also are praying for Don Kramer. We had a beautiful time service with the family Monday afternoon, and then we buried Joy out at the Veterans Memorial Cemetery Tuesday morning. That was family only. It was very misty, but it was still a pleasant experience just to be with that incredible family. And but we do pray for Don. He's quite obvious about what good am I to hang around here, and I'm tired of this. I just so he's having appropriate responses to being alone and feeling worthless and like he can't do anything, but he still gets around on his own and is living by himself, does not want to go someplace else right now. So we pray for Don. Dolores Lira has been having very good news about her cancer, and even though she got COVID, I think it is manageable, so haven't heard from Val since Sunday. Rochelle Beckwith we've been praying for, and will continue about her feet and about her neck. Virginia Duffield went into the hospital, and the doctors wanting her to have a procedure that I think sounds like it installs some sort of mechanism in the heart that helps it avoid forming blood clots or whatever, and it's called
Walkman procedure.
Walkman procedure. Does that sound familiar, Paula?
Yeah.
So the doctor desperately wants her to experience that, but I'm not sure about if he feels her condition warrants or is able to take that. So, but she was in the hospital, so she was having some episodes that needs to be cared for. So Virginia Duffield and Betty are together, and Betty's son, I think, came down to help take care of his aunt. Wally goes back in April to maybe for his final visit to MD Anderson.
Hope so.
Hope so.
I saw him yesterday. He's still wearing his hard collar.
Okay.
But he said he feels great.
Wearing his hard collar, but it still feels good and getting around. And okay, we just thank God for that. Roy Boatman, Diane, no difference necessarily.
Well, he's really doing well.
He's doing well. Yeah.
He's really doing well.
Especially with the possibility that it wasn't a severe stroke as much as a concussion that triggered some common episodes like that. So if that's the case, they're hoping that there's a lot more stability and capacity to stay at home and be together that way. That'd just be a great gift. Owen and Gary Davis we're praying for. We're praying for Ray Paz's provider, Dixie, who was to find out sometime this week about her husband's maybe being released after raising incredible amounts of funds to pay off a very crooked government and judge. So we just pray for that. John Seaman, we're continuing to pray for, a very dear friend of the house. We have Claude Anderson. Come in. There's Rochelle. There's that strange-looking speeding demon.
Almost ran into the realtors.
Yeah, they're having a meeting and they're serving wine and stuff. I said, hey, we may drop by and bring it back over here or something.
Now you tell us.
I hear you're chasing my husband down on the highway.
I did try to hit my passenger side brakes on the way here, so maybe I should go get some wine. Yeah.
Because you were driving, she was pumping the door like crazy.
Yeah. I wish this was a driver's ed car.
Yeah, we did a driver's ed car. I could control this thing. I mentioned you just a moment ago about things that you're waiting maybe to see. Any update, any procedures scheduled or whatever, Rochelle?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, just follow up with this and just, he
Pain
said
is, pain is manageable and...
at the moment, no, but because I slammed on the brake.
Oh.
There were 3 cars in front of us slamming on brakes. They weren't yielding for the person coming off the highway. He switched lanes right behind them as they all hit their brakes, and I had to hit ours too.
Well, I didn't know it was rain, but I'm headed for San Antonio this morning, and well, I see this pickup barreling at me, you know, and pulls up alongside and slows down. And for a mile or so, I mean, I can see him there.
You're like, I'm not looking.
And I
I'm
said,
not
you
looking.
know, he must have seen a policeman or something, because I was doing 2 miles over the speed limit. It's 65, and I was doing 67.
Yeah.
And he stopped. I said, okay, maybe he's stopped, you know, but after that, I think you sped up a little bit and then slowed back down. And I said, yeah, that may be somebody I know. I looked over, there's Shane. You know,
I only
gave me
honked
thumbs
3
up.
times.
Honked 3
I
times.
honked 3 times.
I didn't hear you honk.
I
You did. You honked, okay.
Well,
But
his
boy, after
new
I
horn
gave you
isn't
thumbs
like his
up-
old horn. The new horn isn't
Yeah,
like
it was-
the old horn.
No, no, it's
It
not.
goes nee now
TV, okay.
instead of whoa whoa.
Yeah, I did not hear the horn.
Yeah.
Change
But
that.
I finally got to see him. He gave me a thumbs up, and then after that, shoo, he's gone.
Yeah, I was,
And needed to get to work.
I
So
was, yeah, I was running
Do you-
later than you normally am.
you exit the first exit after you flip on I-37.
No, I'm at Suntide, right by where Flint Hills is.
Okay, on further down,
Yeah.
like the second exit or some third exit.
Yeah, it's
maybe?
probably the third. It's the one after Southern Mills Road.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Because I kind of, after I got around the bend, you know, I wonder if he already got off the train. I never could see.
Yeah.
On, you know, but that was fun. But y'all okay? No accidents or things? Just a
Just a
scary
close,
moment.
just a close call.
Okay.
There's a song about Little Nash Rambler that goes beep 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 beep.
Yeah, there he is.
His horn went beep beep beep.
That's got to be an overdose.
Oh, it is.
Your childhood days. Surprised they had things like that on movies. Or,
If I could remember it, I'd sing it.
no, you will not sing it. That's okay. I had a very beautiful, tender moment with Claude's family. Marilyn was there, and cousins galore, and her son, and Ben, welcome in. She's got
Hooray.
her cute on, so yeah, for what it's worth. But came back, and Marilyn's back home safe. Hurting, she's got arthritis in her neck, and it was a long day for her. She went up yesterday, but you know everything today, getting it done. But got to sing, and we did the graveside service, but it was a little bit more prolonged and involved some more things that way. Judy's here, successful carpal tunnel surgery, no pain to speak of. She's been very disobedient to instructions that I stood there and listened to before they released her. And so, for what it's worth, you just pray for her, because I hope that thing doesn't hurt. But she's got some really strong pills, Celebrex and Tylenol with codeine. And so she probably won't be in this. She'll be in La La Land now for the next 10 days or something. But so far, it's been there. Getting any feeling back or anything yet?
I think I am. It's going to be a slower process than I like, but it really is. It feels, you know, I didn't have any issues with it during the night, which sometimes you do with the carpal tunnel. So it's getting better.
Okay, I was very grateful for that. I had down Pat LaFera for dental surgery, but she went in and they said, we can't do it. Your cap is too hard on there and it's not worth taking off. So she didn't have any dental surgery when Judy, that Monday, day before yesterday,
Yeah.
because she had gone in the previous week on Friday or something to check about it. So that wasn't there. So those were those things. I mentioned Dolores, and she had COVID. Have you heard from Val about they're doing okay?
She went to work. She's been going to work this week. Her mom's doing much better.
Yeah. So the symptoms
On
of the
Monday, Val said she was a little weak,
okay,
but it's not as bad as it was.
okay.
And so it's just,
That's symptoms of the COVID that she
I think,
contracted.
a combination of
Okay.
COVID
And
and the
all the
chemo
treatments
and all
for
the
the
treatment.
cancer.
Yeah.
but she's been declared cancer free, and we're just very, very grateful for that. So, what a precious, precious gift to receive for that. And yes, Vicki.
My friend Opal Creasy,
Yeah.
she's
Girl.
she went back to work.
Oh my goodness.
She's doing good,
Okay.
and she's in remission at this time.
Okay.
So praise for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for your
And for Rick, and for Vicky, and then you mentioned a friend of y'all's from the senior center that fell.
Yes,
And
broke her neck.
her 3 vertebrae in her neck. Actually went to the senior center, but had gone by and gotten maybe some CAT scan or some X-rays of her neck. Went on to the senior center, and the doctor called her, couldn't get a hold of her. Called the son, said, "You go find your mother, get her up here right away. She's got a broken neck, and she doesn't need to be risking walking around." So they went and got her. And I don't know if she got surgery or
Yeah, she had surgery today.
she did have surgery today. Okay.
I gotta call her when I get home.
Okay. Rhonda had her first or second physical therapy, first one, and it hurts worse now than it did before she had physical therapy, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. So we're just going to enjoy your pain, Rhonda. I'm glad you're getting something done, though. That needs to happen. So really, really good for that. Any other needs that you know about that you would share with us? Dear friend of Holly's, Raina Pegg, had lost her stepmother. Had been her stepmother since Raina was 12. So she was an important person. And Raina has 3 sisters, or is there a brother and 2 sisters? I know there are 4 kids.
Yeah, she has one brother.
One brother and 2 other sisters. She said there are 4 in the family, but they were stepmom to her, and I'm hoping they will. I'll go see her at visitation Friday afternoon. So I talked with her this morning when I was sitting up in San Antonio. Got there early so I could do that and get some things arranged. So we pray for Raina.
She called me and asked me if I thought you would mind if she called you, and I said, probably be burned if you don't.
Yeah.
He can either tell you, yes, I can do it, or I'm tied up.
Yeah, no, I could. She thought it was gonna be Friday, and I don't have anything Friday. I have a team meeting Saturday, but I'll go to the opening at 8 o'clock over at St. Pius, and then the funeral's at 10 o'clock, so I'll have a chance to check in and make sure Casey's behaving himself. And
Is the funeral going to be here?
it's out at Memory Gardens, out there in the chapel, and then I think from what I could gather from where I asked if there's a graveside also, which is fine. I mean, there normally is, so I'll be doing both of them. So we'll pray for the Clark family. Her name was Clark. Lucretia Clark. Graham Clark was her maiden name, Grim, I think. I remember correctly. So I'm honored that you would trust me enough to recommend. But evidently I buried her husband in 2018, and she mentioned marriage, but I don't know who in her family I performed.
She said you married him and her.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh.
My goodness. That's scary that they would let me do that too after I married them and got them in trouble. So who knows what's going to happen. So
When she told me, she said my stepmother died, but I don't know when the funeral will be because we don't have a preacher. And I said, well, there's several of them in town. Just start calling.
just start calling.
She said, well, do you think Billy will mind? I said, I can't answer for Billy. You call him.
She texted me or something, and I said, yeah, Friday or Saturday is open right now. I've had funerals the rest of the week, but not Friday and Saturday. So
Yeah.
we'll be good for that. Yeah. So that's neat. Okay.
Yeah, her husband was retired Army for
Right.
28 years or
Right.
something like that. And,
Okay.
yeah,
They live out in Flower Bluff.
yes. Well, they didn't. They lived here in town
Okay.
still, but now she lives out towards 6 Points.
Oh my
Not
goodness.
6 Points, but five
Orange Grove?
Downtown?
There.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Good. Let's have prayer and then we can do our Bible study. But we'll be remembering these, and thank God Ben is returned safely home.
Yes.
And I know he is too.
And he didn't
11
kill any of his
kids and
students.
And he didn't kill any of his students.
did he kill any of them? Thought about it, but
Definitely thought about it.
yeah. They don't pay you enough for doing
Thank
that,
you.
do they?
Thank you.
Yeah, he printed off. He appreciate that
Oh,
because
my
people come looking for that. Anybody else want a hard copy?
I do.
Came in the mail
I
today.
do.
It came in the mail?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Thank
Debbie still sends them, but I still print a few for those who
Take one.
don't get it.
They're hard to read on that computer.
Yeah.
They're hard to read on my telephones.
Yeah, I had to throw my phone turned sideways and it blocks half of it, so frustrating. Frustrating. It is. You have some,
Just get a
No, I'm just gonna
desktop.
stand here a minute. I'm
that's okay.
Just get a desktop computer or
Uh,
use Judy's and you can read the whole
we
thing.
got one, but she's always in there talking to somebody in real estate, so can't get to my stuff over there anyway. All right, let's have a word of prayer. God, thank you so much for the love that you give to us for each other. It is not something we discovered or made a decision to invest in. It is something that you gave to us because of your love for us and your love for your family. God, I ask that you bless these lives that we have mentioned here tonight, that in your presence with them, that you call us into their situation because of our love and concern for them and our prayers for them. We offer all of these to you, knowing that they are in the hands of the great physician, and that as you have planned their journey, you will be faithful to see them to the end, to the beginning, really, of what life really is meant to be. So God, we ask your blessings upon them and your blessings upon us as we look at your word together this night in this place. In the name of Christ, I pray for us. Amen. Could have turned on my microphone and been a little bit easier hearing instead of having to yell so loud at you. You'll never believe it, but we're still in the book of Genesis for the 7th year in a row. I'm teasing. We're only 3 chapters away from ending, and then we'll probably start into Exodus. We won't get real far, but I'd like to finish the story of the Israelites as they leave the promised land to follow God's leadership in their lives. But tonight, beginning in 47 at verse 13, we have a story about Joseph and Egypt and the famine that is an obvious insertion in the middle of the Jacob story. We'll pick up the Jacob story, after we get through with verse 26 tonight. Again, it goes back, but the section that we have right now could easily fit at the end of chapter 41 at verse 57, where the narrator or the editor, the redactor, has been describing what Joseph has interpreted as a dream of the Pharaohs and gotten everything in place. And so this story is the story of what happened after the famine began. Now, between what we're reading tonight and the end of chapter 41 is the whole story about Joseph and his brothers, and they're coming into town and they're buying grain, and it just seems to be a little bit out of place, except that maybe chronologically speaking, this is a good place for the redactor to take the oral tradition and the stories that came to him in the time of the exile in Babylon, when they began to discover and develop the skills at writing and materials to write upon. Until that moment, basically, and ancient culture had nothing but little clay, soft tablets, and they would use a pointed stick and they would imprint on these clay tablets their language. And Hebrew still looks like that. It looks like a bunch of, strokes with, doesn't have anything curving necessarily, anything. And then they would harden that clay tablet, and that would be sort of kept permanently there. They may have had some other ways of maintaining some written materials. We know that about maybe 180 years before the Babylonian captivity, while they are still in Jerusalem in around 622, 624, because they get carried off into captivity in 587, and then they begin returning home in the mid 400s, 300s. I may be 100 years off. Dates are not something that I can't remember what my birthday is, so forgive me for the dates. But we do know that that there was a a discovery of a portion of the book of Deuteronomy that was found in the trash, or in the all of the broken stuff in the temple that had gone out of use, because the Jews in Jerusalem had really tied into the Canaanite religion, had abandoned the temple. It was in disarray. It was, just a mess, like an old abandoned closet. And when little Josiah, at the age of 13, becomes king, he instructs that the temple be cleaned up. He just felt that the worship of the God of his fathers was important. And in the process of getting the temple put back in order, they run across a scroll or a document or something that has a portion of the book of Deuteronomy on it. And he instructs that the book be read twice in one day. And so there was a substantial amount of writing that they had available to them. It may be clay tablets that they just found in order. We do have, some archaeologists have found some evidence of an Abraham-like figure over in Ur of the Chaldees, discovered in a kind of library or municipality building. As they were excavating, they dug out a room, and they found, literally laying like dominoes stacked against each other on the floor, these little clay tablets that were just lined up and left there. And so they began to pull them out and try to interpret that Ugaritic language. And in that language, they ran across a period in their life where there was a leader of their clan that believed that there was only one God. And then when he died, then the polytheists took back over, and Abraham had to skedaddle because he was part of the group, the family that believed in one God. And so God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our God, led him out of Ur of the Chaldees and said, I want you to follow me. I've got a place that I'm going to take you, a land that you know not of. And that didn't please Sarah very well. But she went along with it because, as Abraham said, we're going to trust him. He's going to get us there. And that's got to be a miserable thing. When Judy and I pull out of the house and we're headed to eat someplace, she will immediately say, where are we going? I want to know where we're going. And so I'm out of stuff. Where do you want to go? Well, I don't know. Just tell me where we're going to go. I got to know where we're going to go. And then she right seats, drives, passenger seat drives. And she doesn't slam on the brakes too much, but boy, she lets me know if there's cars coming. So, I got 4 eyes on me when we're driving. I'm really in a safe condition. But they found, Sarah had to have been just really complaining that she's following this crazy husband of hers that's going to a land that you know not of. That's not exactly a happy vacation destination anyway, but they go ahead and head down. So anyway, when they began to write the materials down, they began to design and copy the skills and the techniques of the Persians. And even though they were still writing in what we call Hebrew language, they were able to make it much more accessible and repeatable and copyable. In fact,
There's a note from Ida saying that they just got back from San Antonio and she continues to be cancer-free. Praise God.
Good. Yay, Ida. Glad to hear that. I just came back from San Antonio too, but I think I got everything you left. So, but I'm home and we're here, so we had the funeral for Claude over there in San Antonio.
That's very
Good
wonderful.
to hear. Thank you, Ida, for letting us know that. When they begin to write it down, then Ezra, when he comes back to Jerusalem because the Persia has taken over and doesn't want to use his military force to keep all of their slaves or their conquered people in their ghettos and in their places, and so they tell him to go home and worship their gods, and he's just going to tax them, and that's a way he'll be able to provide for his coffers. And so when Ezra comes back, Ezra carries a very unique title that carries over the New Testament. Ezra is known as the scribe of Israel. And we assume and have some evidence that Ezra really was sort of like what you'd call the president of the seminary. he evidently had a group of younger men who he trained, who would sit and would copy Holy Writ down, and so they could have it before them so they could read, because the younger generation did not commit to memory as the older generation had. They were dying off, and so part of the reason for writing it down was to be able to save it for posterity. And I've shared with you before that there are two very distinct additions or helps to having the Bible present to us today in the form that we do it. One of them is the Samaritan Pentateuch. First 5 books of the Bible. There is a copy of the Samaritan Pentateuch that's somewhat different than the Hebrew Bible. The Masoretic text is what we call this. And then the third resource for translating the Bible is the Septuagint. When the Jews escaped the Romans and the Greeks, many of them went to Egypt and settled in Alexandria, Egypt, and created a very fine ghetto there. They were kind of affluent, but they also had their synagogues, and they had a copy of the Masoretic text. But they, by this time, were Greek-speaking, and so it was kind of like what happened with Vatican II. All of a sudden, the council got together and said, we want people to hear the word. We want people to be able to participate in the Mass, and so it's to be done now in the language of the common people, not in Latin any longer. Shane, you weren't old enough that you remember any of the pre-Vatican. You were raised post-Vatican II, so it was always in English, and the altar was always out, and priests facing the people and stuff like that. So I think there's still one or two. I think St. John the Baptist now has been given permission to have one Latin Mass every week, I think, because there's a friend of mine that is actually Jim Berg's daughter, who grew up with that, and she misses it, and it's very meaningful for her, so she's going to go and she still goes to regular Mass at St. Pius, but wants to go and experience the Vatican, pre-Vatican Mass, pre-Vatican II Mass in Latin. So she still has some good feelings about it. I don't think she knows Latin that well, but at least it triggers some responses from her childhood, so it feels very good. And so in Alexandria, Egypt, everybody was speaking Greek, and so they got together 70. The legend is there were 70 scholars who took the Masoretic text, the Hebrew version, and translated it into Greek. Took them 70 years, 70 guys working. They must have been illiterate, because it doesn't take that long to translate something into Greek. But anyway, they got it done, and we have copies of the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And tonight, for example, there is a statement. Look with me at verse 21 in chapter 47. In verse 21, my Bible says, "And as for the people, he made them slaves of them from one end of Egypt to the other." Does anybody have a translation that says different than making them slaves?
Well, it says servants.
Servants, okay, slaves. In the in the Masoretic text, in the Hebrew Bible, you may have a footnote. Mine has a footnote here at the end of that, of them made slaves of them. Really, the Hebrew says he removed them to the cities.
That's what I was going to say.
That's what yours says, or
This
is that
says
footnote?
the land became the Pharaohs at the end of 20, and then 21, and Joseph moved the people to the cities from one end of Egypt to the other.
Yeah, and that's the translation of the Hebrew. But then the rest of the story says, well, if they're in the cities, then who's caring for the cattle? Who's tilling the land? So, well, if they looked at the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Greek translation, and the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Greek translation has he made them slaves. But we're going to get to that part of the story. So even in tonight's reading, there is that evidence how translators continue to consult the other two traditions to make sure we get the maybe the best sense of the thing. But let's go back to verse 13, chapter 47, the book of Genesis. Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. So that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, which is where Jacob had come from, languished by reason of the famine. And so phase number one, to answer the solution. Remember, Joseph is in charge of the famine and the resources of the Pharaoh to try to help the people through this time. So his first phase is, Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money and put it into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "You got to give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." They emptied their bank accounts. They cashed in all their savings bonds. They did everything they could. I mean, they had no more. They didn't have 2 cents to rub together. They couldn't even find Coke cans to go and sell it at the Maverick markets. They had nothing. They're still hungry. So what are we going to do? This is phase two. Joseph answered, "Give your cattle, and I will give you food in exchange for your cattle if your money is gone." In other words, bring me your livestock. Now, he didn't. It sounds as if they went home and gathered all their cattle and loaded them on back of 18-wheelers and drove them into the capital city and put them in some big feedlot. Now, again, we're having to read between the lines. They just probably is to be understood that this next year of famine, they basically turned over the ownership of all of their cattle to be part of Pharaoh's large herd. But they remained out in the land so they could be fed and taken care of by the slaves, okay? As we're fixing to see that, okay, they spent their money, so they brought their cattle to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the asses. And he supplied them with food in exchange for all their cattle that year. All right, now, so next year we're hungry, we ain't got any more animals, and you don't like rabbits, because we can grow rabbits a dime a dozen, but you won't take that. And so when that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We will not hide from my Lord that our money is all spent, and the herds of cattle are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land." That's all we got left. You're looking at it. Just us. And that place that we've been sitting at. And again, they're not in the cities, as the Hebrew translation tends to want us to see. They're still out there in their homesteads, out there in their land. And so, why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So, the seed that is translated here probably can be translated corn seed, something that would have nourishing values and everything else. And so the next verse, Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Now, family, I have read my Bible cover to cover at least once. I don't do it systematically, but I'll tell you, I don't remember this episode. I don't remember this. I remember the locust that we're going to get into when we get to Exodus, or maybe the next chapter of now it's going to be Moses, so it's going to be in Exodus, but I remember a lot of these stories, but this one I don't remember. I do not remember this, all this bartering that's going on between the people and needing to have something to eat. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe upon them. The land became Pharaoh's. And as for the people, he made slaves of them, or as Rochelle's, what translation is that? Is that NIV or?
No, this one's as one of my friends called it, the Baptist Bible. It's
What
my
is it?
apologetics Bible.
Okay.
CSB.
See what?
CSB.
CSB?
Southern Baptist Bible?
No.
No. Holman
It's
Christian.
Holman Christian Study Bible, but open the fly to the very fly leaf. It should have some designated
Won't that stand for Catholic Study Bible?
Yeah, no. Now that's either the Jerusalem Bible or
CSB. I'll tell you what it means in here in just a second.
okay.
It
It is a Holman Bible, but I think that's a publisher.
it'll tell you, like if you look it up on, it's Holman Christian Standard Bible. That's the translation.
Holman Christian Standard
Mhm.
Bible. Okay. I'll confess to you, that's a new one for me. But good.
I haven't been able to find your translation. I've looked.
Mine's Revised Standard.
Okay.
Plain and simple.
I've been through 12 on the Bible app. I'm like,
Where is it?
which one is
Yeah, the one we use on Sunday morning for PowerPoint is the Common English Bible.
Right.
And Debbie finally found me a hard copy of that one.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, and it's in my office. I really enjoy that, but and that's what we use up there.
But-
This one is it's called the New Oxford Annotated Bible.
Oh, okay.
This is sort of a seminary college Bible because the footnotes and annotations are kind of scholarly stuff rather than devotional sorts of stuff. So it's a very different thing. And for serious Bible students, I recommend this. It's just a in
That's
fact,
why I
the-
like my
the Oxford Annotated may be
Greek Bible.
wrapped around the King James version, but this is the Revised Standard version.
Okay.
I've had this thing 40 years now or something. So.
My Hebrew to Greek Bible's keyword study is NASB,
Yeah,
but the
New
95
American
one, not the new
Yeah.
one.
Not
No,
the
I
New
didn't-
American Standard.
It is the old one though. It's
yeah.
the old version.
The old version. Yeah.
The new one leaves out too much.
Yeah.
But what comes out of your mouth sometimes at Bible study
Oh,
is
that's
the
not in here.
is the RBV.
Yes.
The
Revised Billy version.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes it's really sort of a compendium of what I've read and try to be accurate as best I can. But thanks for that observation. I'll watch my mouth from now on. One of the things to remember is that really in the Egyptian religion, the Pharaoh was a god.
Mm.
And so, and like we believe in our own religion, you know, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, the gold in every mine. God owns this world. And it doesn't make us, it makes us slaves to Jesus, which is one of the most freeing thing you could ever experience. But again, we know that when the writers or the compilers, the redactors that compile the Bible as we have it, we know historically that in Egypt it was still the case that nobody, it was like a feudal kingdom in medieval Europe. The king owned the land and the people worked the land, and they got some of the produce of the land, but a major tax was always filed against the land. There was in Jewish experience, there was a place where the Jews occupied, and their tax of their produce was 60% that had to go to the ruler. It was 40% that had to go to the ruler over in Palestine, I think was where it was. Over in when they were living with Persia. So a very heavy tax and basically 40% of your produce went to the government. We're going to find out that basically Joseph levels a 20% tax that they will give because, they don't own the land now. They are enslaved, not in the sense of being branded, though remember this because when we get to the story of the Pharaoh who doesn't remember Joseph, he is going to treat the Jews as if they really are the most pitiful slave relationship you can have. He's abusive. He doesn't care if they live or die. So that is a different order of slavery that the common person in Egypt would have experienced. Anyway, verse 21, as for the people, he made them slaves of them, or took them into the cities from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priest he did not buy. For the priest had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh, and lived on the allowance which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. They were an exclusive set that was sort of treated differently than regular common people, and they maintained the land that they had. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And as the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. 4/5 you shall be your own, as seed for the field and as food for yourselves and your household. This is the third phase. Phase number one, they broke the bank. They gave every dime they could. They hocked their diamond rings. They did everything. They had nothing. There was coin or currency that they could do. Step number two, phase number two, okay, we're going to deed all of our cattle to you. Give us, instead of paying us a price for that, just give us grain so we can feed the cattle, but we can feed ourselves. And when the year was out and they had finally used up all of the grain that their herds would have brought, then they say, okay, we now will become your slaves and our land will become yours. Now please feed us. It's the only thing we got left to bargain with. And so basically Pharaoh does that, and then he says, okay, here's grain, go and plant it. So we probably are near the end of the 7 years, because there's an expectation that this time when they plant, there's going to be a harvest. And so there's nothing that internally as we write the numbers that we can kind of figure this out. Because again, Jacob and the brothers come down maybe the second or third year of the famine, and this is 7 years on, and they've just arrived according to where this particular story is placed. So we have a hard time knowing, except the implication of the feeding that's going on and the planting that's going on would suggest that maybe they're at the end of the 7 years. And the people said to Joseph, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be slaves to Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priest alone did not become Pharaoh's. And with that particular arrangement, that again, when that author is saying to this day, he is recognizing that it was still well known in the 4th century BC, 1400 years after, or maybe about 1200 years after this was taking place, that this still was the case in Egypt, that they gave a fifth of their crops to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh took care of them and protected them and made sure they could live well in the land, and until really the Pharaoh that comes around and finds all these Jews under his nose at their doorstep on the northeastern boundary of Egypt, and then turns them into abused and battered people, treated as if second-class citizens, as if they're even subhuman, as we did our own slaves. And so, again, that's a whole different story, but it's going to happen when Joseph is no longer the picture and in charge of everything. And it's amazing how we forget our ancestors so easily, and the price that they paid for us and the kinds of things that they did. So one of the beautiful things that I heard at Claude's funeral today was how much he enjoyed their family reunions. And after it was over with, I was talking to some of Marilyn's cousins and saying, we just don't do that anymore. In fact, our kids hardly know the other family kids. And I said, yeah, it really is that way. We live so separately now. That we don't even hardly know the cousins. We don't even hardly relate to them. And back in my day, you related to the cousins because, you didn't live a long ways off and, go off gallivanting to Europe or whatever else. If you had a vacation, you went to see grandmother, and everybody sort of showed up, and you lived with your cousins and endured them and everything. I have a closer relationship with my cousins than my children had with theirs, and it's just it's a change of what's going on, and it's not good or bad. It is different, and so we have to learn how to overcome that. And so, to some extent, when Joseph comes along and he's dead, they forget what good benefits that Joseph had done for their country to save it. And they forget what he brought to them. And so all of Joseph's family and his lineage treated like dung until they can't stand it anymore. And of course, then we get the story of Moses and his tongue-tiedness, and the story of him going and it's just, Moses, the perfect story of somebody who doesn't have 2 cents to rub together that God makes into a millionaire. He didn't have squat of a talent or anything else, except he happens to know the language, and he happens to have the blood of supposedly of the Pharaoh's family in him, and so he can get into places nobody else can, and God uses that. Even despite the fact he says, I can't tell a straight song. I mean, what do you want me to do? He said, I'll give you an interpreter. You'll be okay. So we'll go with that. And sure enough, he got his people set free. That's another story for another time. But this is part of a remarkable story about a people who destitute, have no place to turn. To some extent, as I end this, I kind of have been laboring to feel with people who are bereft of any resource. And I think about the impoverished in our own nation. How many children live in poverty and in hunger? And they have no resources. They have no recourse necessarily. And it's so easy for those of us that overeat to sort of blame them for being lazy or for just, having poor family structures and everything else. But I read this story and know that there was a Joseph that was called up to answer the concerns of the people and the current concerns of God's people. And I so enjoy those stories that emerge out of Christian communities that are taking care and reaching to those who have no other resource. I admire so much the legacy of the Christian community of every tradition, from Mother Teresa's to Good Samaritan to Loaves and Fishes, which is an ecumenical experience, to churches that just on their own take Saturdays and go down and hand out food to the poor. And I was visiting with Wesley United Methodist Church over here, and two or three times a week, Food Bank brings in massive amounts of food, and they have a group of people in that area that literally come by and pick up sacks of food for their family. And it takes a lot of sweat and toil. It takes something to put all those big sacks together and get them lined out and open up the building, their fellowship hall, and bring those people in, and those people line up and they know it's there for them. And I see that, and I don't know what it's like to be at wit's end and without anything. I've been broke before and in debt. I was getting dirty letters from Conoco and Phillips 66 when I was in seminary, and I took a job and I couldn't pay rent to my aunt and uncle that I was living with them, so they let me paint their house on the outside to take care of the rent. And finally, in desperation, terrorized by my economic plight, I called my uncle, my legal guardian, and told him what was happening. And he said, I'll get you a check. Didn't dawn on me that I still had money that Mama had set aside or that the government had given to us on GI Bill or something. And so he bailed me out. And I felt so silly that I had wasted so much anxiety and nervous energy, hardly sleeping at night, going to seminary. Couldn't even study because these bill collectors were coming after me and threatening me and treating me like I was a criminal. And I was trying to be an honest person. I'd write it back. I will pay you. I will pay you. Just trying to do it right now. And found a job for minimum wage and paid him off. Well, Uncle Dan got me some money so I could pay him off and get him off my back. But I know what it's like to be afraid, but I didn't miss a meal. Aunt Clarice made sure about that. I was part of her family, and oh my gosh, I feel blessed by that. And I was an orphan for years, and I really don't know what it's like to be an orphan. Oh my gosh. At this last Saturday, there's one of our members of our Men's Walk to Emmaus whose mother took him and his two older siblings to the Masonic orphanage in Fort Worth and dropped them off. She was crying. And he grew up in that orphanage. And the stories about what they experienced and how he would, I was an orphan, but we had a church family that moved into our home and foster parented us until I went away to college. I had more mothers than I could shake a stick at. And of course, the story I love telling for funerals is the story of Robert and Rosemary Cochran showing up in Brownwood, Texas, lying to me that they were on vacation and were headed back to La Feria, Texas, and just happened to be going through Brownwood. I knew those people were lying through their teeth. There's no way you get to La Feria going through Brownwood. You really got to go on a cowpoke train to do that. And sitting at that Underwood's barbecue thing, saying to me, the day my mother died, those women got together in that church and promised each other, covenanted together, that every day since I was 13 years of age, and here I am, 19, sitting in Brownwood, Texas. She's telling me every day since my mother died, they have agreed and have bonded together to pray for us, 4 boys, every day that they would wake up. Had no idea. And then I wonder why I was felt blessed. I really do not. I carry some scars by the death of my mother. I don't remember my father. He's kind of like a hero, but I don't really carry those deep scars of what it's like not to have resources or not to have family. I had 2 great grandmothers, and I had that foster family, and I had a church family, and I had a small school, that we knew everybody. Nothing stopped, except Mama wasn't there. And I just feel incredibly blessed when I hear Paul Joseph, my Jewish rabbi, tell me that the last phrase of Psalm 23 is that should be translated, goodness and mercy will track us down. That verb comes from the hunt, not follow us around like a puppy dog, but will track us down, hunt us down, chase us down. Goodness and mercy will chase us down for the rest of our lives. I know that to be true. That's my life. I can claim being an orphan without any need for anybody to feel sorry for me, because God's given me a family. Every place I've turned, I've found a family. Here, I have a family. Not without home. Just wonderful how God fills in those empty spaces of life. Okay, that's enough. I've really taken you. I told you it's going to be short tonight. I don't know why it went long. Well, I do too. After Rochelle came in and started telling me about this translation I've never heard of.
That Rochelle. That's Rochelle.
I can't believe she'd do that. It's just, not only backseat drives, but comes in and takes over and tries to make sure that I know what I'm talking about occasionally. So,
Well, I saved our
love it.
lives.
Yes, you did.
I did.
Like,
I
pressing
saved
that
our
brake.
lives. He was reaching for his phone in his pocket, and I'm like, oh, yeah.
Sam.
I'm like, wait, brake lights. I saved
I love it. I love it. Y'all belong together. Okay, let me dismiss you with the care and the love of a God who knows everything about you. God, go with my family, these brothers and sisters of mine, into a world that desperately needs to know that there's a home waiting for them. There's a home right now where they can find peace and they can find security and they can find love and embrace and forgiveness. Oh God, grant to us that incredible sense of being brothers to people who have no idea that we're kin to them. Grant to us the freedom to love them as we find them, to bring them near you so that they might find the brother that each of us needs in Jesus Christ. For it is in his name that I pray for us. Amen. Blessings on you. You just misled.